Picture this scenario. You meet Joanne at a house party. She's very pretty, personable and easy to talk to. Now her name comes up as someone who could be asked to contribute to a charity. But what do you know about Joanne's generosity? Well, the correct answer is virtually nothing. But in fact, you would rate her as more charitable without any evidence. The truth is, she's actually a bitch. But now it's too late. Fast forward 10 years and you're already married with 3 kids, a depressing job, and you have to go to the in-laws next week, which you dread because you hate your mother-in-law who just mocks you all the time. But Joanne says that's just the way she expresses her love. But oh no, not with Mark, the golden son. Where was I? Oh yeah, so you throw your hands in the air at the big bearded geezer in the sky and cry, where did it all start? It was the halo effect, of course, your wise grandfather replies. But before we look into the halo effect, take a look at this. What do these 3 exhibits have in common? The answer is that they are all ambiguous. You read the left display as ABC and the right display as 12, 13, 14, but the middle terms in both are exactly the same. You could just as well have read them as A13C or 12B14, but you didn't. Why didn't you? The shape is read as a letter in the context of letters and as a number in the context of numbers. The entire context helps determine the interpretation of each element. The shape is ambiguous, but you jump to a conclusion about its identity and are not aware of the ambiguity that was automatically resolved. As for Anne, you probably pictured a woman with money on her mind, walking towards a building with tellers and secure vaults. I imagined her with a duffel bag and a Glock, but that's just because I recently rewatched The Dark Knight. But these interpretations are not the only possible ones. The sentence is ambiguous. If an earlier sentence had been, they were floating gently down the river, then followed by Anne approached the bank, you would have imagined an altogether different scene. When you have just been thinking of a river, the word bank is not associated with money. In the absence of an explicit context, you automatically generated a likely context. You weren't aware of another interpretation. When uncertain, your subconscious bets on an answer, and the answer is guided by experience. The rules of the betting are intelligent. Recent events and the current context have the most weight in determining an interpretation. This saves time and effort. When no recent event comes to mind, distant memories govern. Among your earlier and most memorable experiences was singing your ABCs, not your A13Cs. If you did sing your A13Cs in school, you might want to contact your country's education department. Back to the halo effect and your sad little life.
What a sad little life, Jane.
At the first impression at the party, you thought of Joanne as pretty, personable and easy to talk to. Now when her name came up as someone who could be asked to contribute to a charity, you rated her as more charitable because you like Joanne and you will retrieve the feeling of liking her when you think of her. You also like generosity and generous people. By association, you are now predisposed to believe that Joanne is generous. And now you believe she is generous, you probably like her even more because you have added generosity to a list of pleasant attributes. Real evidence of generosity is missing in the story of Joanne, and the gap is filled by a guess that fits your emotional response to her. In other situations, evidence accumulates gradually, and the interpretation is shaped by the emotion attached to the first impression. In an enduring classic of psychology, a psychologist presented descriptions of 2 people and asked for comments on their personality. What do you think of Alan and Ben? Alan is intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious. Ben is envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, and intelligent. If you're like most of us, you viewed Alan much more favorably than Ben. The initial traits in the list change the very meaning of the traits that appear later. An intelligent person who is stubborn is seen as likely to be justified and may even actually evoke respect. But an envious and stubborn person who is intelligent makes him more dangerous. The halo effect is also an example of suppressed ambiguity. Like the word bank, the adjective stubborn is ambiguous and will be interpreted in a way that makes it coherent with the context. The sequence in which we observe characteristics of a person is often determined by chance. Sequence matters, however, because the halo effect increases the weight of the first impression, sometimes to the point that subsequent information is mostly wasted. The halo effect is just one of many biases that lead us to jump to conclusions with incomplete information, even if we know we have incomplete information. An essential design feature of the associative machine that is our minds is that it represents only activated ideas. Information that is not retrieved, even unconsciously from memory, might as well not exist. Our fast, automatic thinking processes excels at constructing the best possible story that incorporates ideas currently activated, but it does not, and cannot for that matter, allow for information it does not have. The measure of success for our automatic thinking is the coherence of the story it manages to create. The amount and quality of the data on which the story is based on is largely irrelevant. When information is scarce, which is a common occurrence, our fast, automatic and subconscious mind operates as a machine for jumping to conclusions. Now consider Billy Bob Jones. Don't laugh at his name, his parents gave it to him. Will Billy Bob Jones be a good leader? He is intelligent and strong and An answer quickly came to your mind, and it was yes. You picked the best answer based on the very limited information that was available, but you jumped the gun. What if the next two adjectives were corrupt and cruel? Take note of what you didn't do as you briefly thought of Billy Bob as a leader. You didn't start by asking, what would I need to know before I formed an opinion about the quality of someone's leadership? Your mind got to work on its own from the very first adjective. Intelligent is good. Intelligent and strong is very good. This is the best story that can be constructed from the two adjectives and the information that you have, and your mind delivered it with great cognitive ease. The story will be revised if new information comes in, such as Billy Bob is corrupt, but there is no waiting and no subjective discomfort, and there also remains a bias favouring the first impression. Not jumping to conclusions, however, is an act. Our default state of jumping to conclusions is the result of the absence of willed activity. It takes considerable effort to see facts whilst withholding judgment and resisting explanations. And this seems to be innate within us. It seems to be part of our biology. Why is it so hard to avoid interpretation? You interpret pretty much as you perform other activities deemed automatic and outside of your control, such as blinking and breathing. In an experiment, psychologists asked women to select among 12 pairs of nylon stockings the ones they preferred. The researchers then asked the women their reasons for their choices. Texture, feel, and colour featured among the selected reasons. All the pairs of stockings, however, were in fact exactly the same. The women supplied backfit, post hoc explanations. There may be a sense-making organ within us, though it may be hard to zoom in on with any precision. A series of famous experiments gives us evidence of the automatic aspect of the act of interpretation. The two cerebral hemispheres of the brain communicate through a brain region called the corpus callosum. Some years ago they used to sever this part of the brain, not just for fun, but to stop epileptic seizures spreading from one hemisphere to the other in severe cases. What you're left with are patients who have no connection between the left and right sides of the brain, which prevents information being shared across. And you can even communicate with each hemisphere completely separately. You're essentially left with two different people. The right hemisphere controls the primary sensory functions of the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere controls the primary sensory functions of the right side of the body. Now say you ask the person's left hemisphere to, let's say, raise a finger, laugh, or grab a shovel. Remember, only the left hemisphere is given this instruction, and the right hemisphere is completely unaware of the instruction from the experimenter. If you instruct the left hemisphere to perform an action, then ask the right hemisphere for an explanation, you get the correct answer of, I don't know. Now when you instruct the isolated right hemisphere to perform an action, then ask the left hemisphere for an explanation, the patient will immediately offer some interpretation. I was pointing at the ceiling in order to, I saw something interesting on the wall, I picked up the phone to see a message from the divorce lawyers, or so on. They confidently concoct some interpretation out of thin air, when the real reason they performed the act was because the experimenter explicitly told them to do so. In one study, people were asked to write about the most traumatic experience of their life for 15 minutes for 4 consecutive days. Those who could fit a narrative around the causes and consequences, a narrative they didn't previously have, went to the doctors fewer times the following year. And it wasn't just about letting off steam. Those who would sing and dance to express their emotions got no benefit, and those who wrote about something random, or those who had already made a narrative previously, received no benefit. They had already made sense of things. It was the people who made progress across the 4 days who showed increasing insight. They were the ones whose health improved over the next year. It was all about sense making. You have to use words, and the words have to help you create a meaningful story. If you can write such a story, you can reap the benefits of reappraisal, even years after an event. You can close a chapter of your life that was still open and still affecting your thoughts and preventing you from moving on with the larger narrative. Earlier I said that we jump to conclusions based on little evidence, but even when we know we have little evidence. Take this study of participants who were exposed to different legal scenarios. All participants were given the background material and were then split into 3 groups. One group were exposed to the presentation from the plaintiff's lawyers. The second group were exposed to the presentation from the defendant's lawyers. And the last group, like a jury, heard both. The lawyers added no useful information that you could not infer from the background story. And the participants were fully aware of the setup, and those who heard only one side could have easily generated the argument for the other side. Nevertheless, the presentation of one-sided evidence had a pronounced effect on judgments. Furthermore, participants who saw one-sided evidence were more confident of their judgments than those who saw both sides. Now this is just what you would expect if the confidence that people experience is determined by the coherence of the story they manage to construct from available information. It is the consistency of the information that matters for a good story, not how complete the story is. You will often find that knowing little makes it easier to fit everything you know into a coherent pattern. The narratives that we concoct automatically compress information and make it easier to process, understand, and store. Stories reduce the dimensionality of information. They bind facts together. They make them all the more easily remembered, and they help them make more sense. Where this propensity can go wrong is when it increases our impression of understanding.